Well, okay, guys, you voted for the Jubilee video. August loves Jubilee videos, loves to me reacting to them. So that's the one we're gonna do. It's teens talk about you know what they talk about. I don't know about you. Well, let's get this started. It's teens talking about some crazy stuff. Also, since you told me I'm muted, you are permanently banned. Just kidding, but I'm gonna time you out for telling me I'm muted when I'm not muted. All right, let's get this going.
Arguing for the slaughter of human beings. You are arguing for the slaughter of human beings because you're pro-choice. And I'm standing here in
That's a strong word.
a fetus cannot.
You're still killing a fetus, so it's not a strong word.
It's really not. But could I just finish my statement?
Step forward if you agree with the...
I hurt my back. I hurt my back doing that dance. I'm getting a little old. Okay, sorry.
Prompt. I have had unprotected sex.
Of course. Woo. Oh, losers. They have never did it without a... I'm just messing around. That's the right thing to do. That's what God wants us to do. So, they're actually winners in my book. Anyway, this is about abortion, by the way. Teens are debating abortion. I didn't know if that would be demonetizable, but whatever. At this point, the way that this video started was wild. So,
so I see we all been getting it on.
I see.
About that.
Damn, it's all women too. See, men. Being a man is hard. It's hard to be a guy. These girls, all they gotta do is say, "I want that." Boom, done. So, just fucking around.
The first time that I had sex, I didn't have the knowledge that I should have. I think, I didn't know what Plan B was until I started having sex. That just maybe I missed that day in class, but that was not taught in sex ed. So I didn't know what Plan B was until I started having sex. But now I'm a lot more educated, a lot more comfortable. I'm on birth control. But cool. Obviously, birth control isn't always effective, isn't always accessible. So I understand my privilege in that.
Well, the first time that I had unprotected sex was a couple months ago with my fiance. We're both adults, and we were in a real period of grief because I had just had.
You see these guys in the game? This is what happens if you have unprotected sex. This is what this guy did. He did a bad thing. That's what's gonna happen to you. So don't do it, guys. Don't do it.
A miscarriage, I think about a month before, after we'd had protected sex.
The first time that I had unprotected sex was unprotected sex was with the person that I am currently married to.
Last time I did it was it was the first time I forgot to bring my sword to the engagement, because you really never know if your enemies are going to strike you down. That's the most vulnerable moment that you have, and so you need to protect yourself from your most grave enemies. You have to protect yourself from them. You just do.
Married straight out of high school. I was 18.
I didn't ban
It was a week after I graduated.
Did I ban him?
And we're really happy together, and we love the idea of having a child. Currently pregnant right now.
Heck yeah.
So clearly I had unprotected sex to get here.
Are you going to college, or do you have a job? How's that?
Wait, that's a teenager? Already married? All right, God bless you. That just seems a little crazy to me, but okay, do your thing.
So I mainly do activism. I try to advocate for people who are in the same position as the person inside of me right now. And I think that the value of their life is intrinsic to every fetus. So honestly, right now, I'm just chilling as an activist.
Okay, cool.
But do you make money?
Sometimes, if my followers give me some.
Sick.
Depends. When you were having unprotected sex, would you say that you would have been financially stable enough to have a child?
No.
No? Would you say you would have been emotionally ready enough to have a child?
No.
Okay. All right, then.
I think I was in kind of a similar situation to you. Not so much because I was pressured by a partner or anything like that, but because the sex ed courses that we had, like yours was lacking, were very lacking in terms of queer sexual education. And the sex I was having, I thought I didn't need any kind of protection for it because
Gotcha.
I was
Makes sense. That's actually a good point. Yeah, no, we that's a good point. Yeah, if you focus a lot of your sexual health education on having babies as the bad thing, that might end up excluding people who don't have baby making engagements, and so they might think that they don't have to worry about it. But it's more than just for that; it's for STDs and other things as well. So
who couldn't get me pregnant?
The first time I've ever had unprotected sex, I was young enough to not know what sex even was. So I was very much manipulated and groomed by someone in my life to think that what I was doing was okay and normal. And that scared me because, you know, when I finally told my parents, it wasn't a really good conversation where they were like, of course they were shocked because that person is in our family. And they were like, that isn't real. You're just trying to get for attention kind of thing. And then, but
who was the person? I mean, I guess she's not going to be explicit about that, but that's crazy.
In a sense, I knew that they believed me because we went to some dingy ass Walmart and bought a pregnancy test because they were like, if you are pregnant, you can't tell anyone that it's his. You have to say that we adopted another child and you would have to keep that baby. I did not want to have a baby at a very young age. I was not emotionally ready. I was not financially ready. I was
That's crazy.
Still in school trying to think like I have a future for myself that I want to do, you know?
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was not pregnant.
Do you think that people can't achieve bright futures when they have children?
They can achieve bright futures if they have a child. I just knew that I wouldn't have been able to achieve that future.
Yeah, it's obviously an additional stressor, when it comes to that. You know, the primary focus of like not having a baby or not birthing a baby isn't just that it could be a stressor on your life. It's more than that. It's like deciding like what point do we as people assign personhood to a fetus? You know, like, are we going to start, what are we going to start assigning? When do we assign that personhood? And I think that in an imperfect world, it's okay to have that conversation. Me personally, I'm at the point where it's like, you know, within the first 2 trimesters for me, mostly because my understanding is you feel pain at like 27 weeks, and that's after the 2nd trimester. But I understand 3rd trimester if there's going to be a complication that could harm the mother or the child. But this is more of like a necessary evil. It's an unfortunate situation. The reality is if we decide to birth every baby tomorrow, we're not going to be able to afford it financially, and we will collapse as a society. We won't be able to afford the welfare services that we provide. And if we didn't afford those, we wouldn't be as a robust and successful of a place, because welfare systems are what made us, or one of the things that made us very strong and it's like a decent society. And so, like, yeah, you could argue some of it is a little bit of population control. It's a harsh thing to talk about. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of where we're at. Yeah, and I don't think that a fetus has personhood at that point. You know, I think that it's assigned personhood really when it's born, for the most part, would be where I would assign that personhood. But it's a tough question. And it's really between the person having the baby and I guess God. It's between them.
Well, there are like resources available, particularly for people who are student parents, for people who are on-campus parents who have children, babies, toddlers, children of all ages.
And to be clear, I also don't think that most conservatives are pro-life. They're pro-birth. I think that's something very important to understand, because the people who are talking about more robust welfare supports are not conservatives. They're the ones that are trying to restrict them. So when it comes down to it, like, it's once the baby's born, okay, goodbye. You know, conservatives aren't talking about better ways to engage in healthcare, better ways to empower the middle class, better ways to deal with the adoption system. Conservatives are mostly just like, have the baby and then goodbye. And so, like, once they're born, they'll be subjected to death because they don't lack supports, whether it's or they're also against like school supports, like financially empowering like Head Start programs. The conservatives tend to be against those. So it's not about pro-life. It's about pro-birth. And then after that, there's a feeling of lack of responsibility. It's like, oh, I don't care anymore. The kid's alive. Okay, fuck you, goodbye. I understand that there are places that will help you that are religious once you have the baby, but that's not the general consensus of conservatives, and it's not widespread enough to be for everybody. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about like more robust welfare programs. So
there are also resources in terms of crisis pregnancy centers, also known as pregnancy help centers. There's thousands of them across the U.S.
Yeah, it's called the stairs. I'm just kidding.
5 crisis pregnancy centers for every Planned Parenthood. And so I think that a lot of these resources are not made known. I think that a lot of people kind of get into the situation of being pregnant and nobody's telling them about these resources, and then they think that they can't do it. And then they get an abortion that they might not have actually wanted. They felt like they had to.
Do you feel like that was...
Unfortunately, there's a lot of religious individuals that have like infiltrated like different, abortion clinics. They'll pose as like I think that those are the crisis centers, are false abortion clinics that pretend to be abortion clinics. And then they're like, oh, no, you can't do this. It's against God. You should review this material. And what they try to do is they try to get you to stall as much as possible so that you miss the window for being able to get abortion, and like they'll be like really slimy about it. That's something that does exist, and I believe those crisis abortion clinics are those things where they mislead people who it's never an easy decision to want to get an abortion. It's not like people act like it's like this LOL, this is fun, let's just get an abortion. That's not what it is. It's not this easy, fun thing for people to get. It's a lot of times very hard, and it's stressful on the body, but it's one of those things that it's like a very difficult, intimate decision, and they make it. And it's not that easy, and it's just an additional stressor on their life to like just stress them out additionally. So,
Your situation, do you feel like you didn't want to have an abortion, like if it happened?
I think that because I grew up in a very conservative home, so abortion wasn't even in the picture. I wasn't even allowed to have that idea. And like thinking of it now, like, yeah, there are crisis centers, but we're also going through like baby formula shortage. Like, there's not even paid parental leave. So if we're going to be able to bring a child into this world, I think we should fight for more healthcare that is free for women or people who can give birth. And especially since I was at a very young age, I honestly just didn't know what I would do in that situation.
For me, when I started engaging in intercourse, I started out using protection. I've been volunteering with Planned Parenthood since I was about 15. When I was a junior in high school, I've had an intense passion for reproductive rights. So I immediately, as soon as I knew that that resource was accessible to me, I put myself on birth control. But unfortunately, birth control isn't the end-all be-all. And from putting myself on several forms of birth control, I realized that the adverse effects of birth control can be very, very altering. And currently, I'm in a very long-term committed relationship with my boyfriend. And of course, when you have someone attractive, you want to have sex with them. And he's the first person I've really started participating in unprotected sex with.
All right, can the distributor step forward?
I've not had sex yet, and that's just because of my religious ethical code and moral code. I've been I'm a Catholic. I've been raised in a Christian household, and I just don't see that as something that's beneficial or valuable to my life at this point. There's been times when I've questioned if I was ready and questioned my faith, but I've always just kind of found my way back to the church and agreeing with the church's teachings. So
listen,
I've never really had...
I'm not trying to be rude, but the reason I think that this person hasn't engaged in intercourse yet, and this is an opinion, and I'm not trying to be rude, is because they're gay, and they're probably struggling with that thought. I'm not trying to be an asshole or anything, but like, I'm just saying. I think that maybe they listen. I'm not trying to be rude. Okay, we've all had those thoughts. We've all been there. I'm just saying, bro. That's not meant to be rude or anything. I'm thinking that maybe he's just figuring out his identity or something, and maybe that's part of it. You know, that's all I'm saying. And maybe that's one of the reasons why. Okay, and it's okay. It's okay. Me too. Same.
A desire, and I was in foster care as a child, and so I witnessed a lot of sexual violence there, and it's just been one of those things I almost feel like just subconsciously I've never really wanted. So I really don't see myself like living in a sexual relationship with another at this time in my life, just because it just isn't really what I feel like is right for me.
Fair enough.
Sort of in the same boat. I'm Catholic as well, but I'm not. I haven't had sex before. It's not just because I'm Catholic. It's like there are other reasons as to why I haven't, such as pair bonding, and I think just it helps to keep the marital act within marriage, because newsflash, sex makes babies. So I think it's just good for a child to have a mother and father, because when families are sort of separated, it causes a lot of problems for children, especially like with divorce. Now it's like surveys have shown that divorce is often worse than the death of a parent, just because it's just like, at least you know, like when the parent is passed, it's like they didn't leave you behind. So
I have two questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, where did you get those surveys from?
I don't remember. It was just in passing, but I don't really know.
The second thing I wanted to ask, you said something about sex always making babies. Well, you didn't say always. You said sex makes babies, and I would love to challenge that a little bit. Because
it's not the only reason for like sex. It's just like you have the pair bonding and sort of the emotional going on.
I think this guy watched Twilight, and he's like, I gotta pair bond. What was it called? What did Jacob do to that child? That horrible thing he did. He looked in its eyes and fell in love with. That's, and where I'm from, they call it something else, but they called it like pair bonding or something. I'm like, that's a little sussy, Jacob. I don't know about that. That's a little weird, brother. So
between the two people, but sort of like the telos, the primary purpose of it, sort of
I guess
is
not
for that.
me,
But there's
maybe.
other legitimate sort of secondary reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you would say that the primary purpose of all sex is babies?
Because I wouldn't say
Banging.
all sex, because there's times where you can't conceive because like the woman cycles, so she's not always fertile. But I think there's just the natural order of that act is for having children.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think what they were getting at is to
Agree
not
with that.
assume that all sex is heterosexual. So
Yeah, that is a pretty heteronormative view.
They could have just said that. It could have been just like, hey, not all of it is heterosexual. They could have probably just led with that one. I personally would have just been explicit in that, but I get what you're saying.
completely validate and
Imprinting.
respect that you
Yeah.
want to have sex for you.
Imprinting. I'm imprinting
But
on you.
for those of us who can't even ever, for any reason, get pregnant during sex, I think it's a little reductive to assume that that's like the reason people would do it.
Well, you can during sex. You just not with somebody you love, obviously, because if you're gay, which is fine. I'm just saying you can still probably do it.
I think there's also a difference between reproductive sex and non-reproductive
Yeah.
sex.
Oh,
Like, let's be
I don't disrespect my wife during reproductive sex, but non-reproductive sex, woo, baby, we role play. Okay, this is what my wife talks about when she says I overshare sometimes. So I should probably pretend I didn't say that.
be so for real. There's so many things you can do to not get pregnant and still have sex with somebody.
Yeah.
I'm obviously not
Do the
Catholic,
do.
but I think that, but I think it's also important to remember that, you know, Catholics and people who do believe that sex should be within marriage also acknowledge that there's types of sex, like oral sex, for example, that you don't conceive children by.
armpit
So I
sex.
think maybe not to put words in your mouth, but maybe what Luke is referring to specifically is coitus and not other types of sex.
Yeah, because people can mean different things by sex. It's like
It's a very general term.
Yeah.
Sex or
Hi,
gender?
this is Ragini, the director of this episode. Please like this video if you enjoy
No,
watching it
I'm
and
just saying
subscribe
I
to our
will
channel.
if I like
Now, let's get back to the video.
Okay.
I
Thanks,
have
Rodney.
had an abortion.
No.
I had mine about a year and a half ago, and I've never felt shame, never felt regret. I've never even second guessed my choice. Surprisingly, my parents are Middle Eastern immigrants, and they were very supportive. The 9 months of pregnancy isn't considered to be a challenge in its own. It's like, oh, you know, you can give the child up for adoption. Oh, there are like resources. There are
That's. I mean, not for nothing, but like going through birth is like is a pretty intense thing to just like, yeah, have the whole baby and then just like put up for adoption. That sounds so easy, but that's a lot. That's a lot. So
crisis pregnancy centers, but those 9 months, that's still morning sickness. That's still doctor visits. I had to go to the ER in the very short time that it took me finding out that I was pregnant to getting the actual abortion because I thought I had an ectopic pregnancy because that's what my gynecologist told me. There's
Yeah.
so many things to consider. I can't go to school if I'm sick, if I'm already, you know, mental health isn't something that's secure for me. And then on the top of that, I'm gonna have to deal with thinking about this pregnancy. Are people gonna judge me for being a teen mom?
Okay, so I had an abortion fairly recently. I had one about 2 to 3 days before my recent birthday last year in November. It was a very unexpected event. I remember having symptoms almost immediately. I was about 6 weeks, I believe, 5 weeks and 7 days. I actually did not suspect I was pregnant because I had been going through some traumatic life events that threw my cycle off. My period was on average 40 days late, so I just didn't suspect anything when I was 6 days late that past cycle. And my boyfriend, who I was confiding in at the time and telling about my current bodily circumstances, had a feeling beyond me, the woman in this equation who should know what's going on. He was the one that prompted me to go get a test because he felt that I was pregnant. And when we found out, it was a shock. I'm the type of person when in my relationships, I make very clear my positions on how I am with, you know, abortion and pregnancy and child rearing. I'm very transparent in that matter because there should be no room for error in that case. But that's because I'm fortunate enough to be educated in that manner. I'm a volunteer with Planned Parenthood, so I knew the resources available to me. And at that time, when I did conceive, it was not when I was on birth control. And so partially, I take responsibility for the circumstances that led to the conception of that pregnancy. Although I'm very grateful and I'm very appreciative that I had access to this form of healthcare, it was something that I grieved heavily.
$1.99.
hey, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate that.
It was something that my boyfriend grieved heavily. We were not ecstatic to have done this. We were not happy that we had to make this choice. But because of our plans as individuals, as adults, and our life plan is to get married, is to complete school, and to maximize our chances of being the parents that we want to be, I felt it irresponsible to be selfish and say, well, I want a baby and I don't want to make that hard choice to terminate. But when you think of somebody else, and that would have been another individual, you have to think what's best for them if they were to be born. And I'm not in a position to where I could emotionally, financially, nor physically provide for a child. Whereas if I would do the hard thing now, later on down the line, when I improve my circumstances, I can be the mother that I want to be instead of disadvantaging myself and that person who did not ask to be put in that situation.
I commend you for coming in front of like a camera and saying that.
Yeah, my parents don't.
I agree. I commend OnlyFans girls for doing the same, coming in front of a camera, you know? Sorry. Gotta stop.
I don't even know either.
Yeah, mine don't either. I need to figure out a way to tell them.
Yeah.
I'm just going to block Jubilee from their YouTube.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you for sharing those experiences with us, because I could hear in your voice, even though I couldn't see your face. It's difficult to share. And I'm so sorry that you had that period of grief and those experiences. Thank you. I've miscarried twice. And taking the abortion pill, I know, though it is a different process, it's not dissimilar in the function of it to a miscarriage. But you did say something that I thought was interesting. You said you think it's selfish to bring a child into a situation where you know that maybe you're not economically stable, or you're not maybe in the best emotional state to have a child. And my mother has 5 children. And when I was born, my father was leaving, he was abusive. And we were on food stamps, she was in college, she was waiting tables and sweeping under chairs when she was in labor with me. So I want to sympathize with that and say I know exactly that kind of economic struggle, that emotional struggle that a lot of...
Well, you don't. You don't. Your mother does. You don't. I understand what you're saying. You have a better idea than most, but like you don't actually truly understand that, like considering that was your mother going through that, not you. But I understand what you're
women
saying.
are in. But I don't think it's fair to say that people who are in poverty or people who might have mental health or emotional issues are selfish for bringing children into those situations.
Well, I don't think that's what she was trying to say. I think that she's trying to say that she personally didn't feel equipped to do those things. But in some instances, there are some people that maybe shouldn't have kids that like are in bad situations. Not everybody. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you shouldn't have kids. But there are people who don't really want kids and they get pregnant and they still have them. There are people who are drug addicts who are going to be neglectful of their children and subject them to forms of neglect and abuse that maybe shouldn't be having kids. It's a tough thing to say. I would never actively say you shouldn't be able to have a baby. But there are definitely people who are in situations where they're not ready for a kid and they have one, and that kid is subjected to like horrible, frankly, abuse. So I think it's fair to say that, like, you know, you should be able to be responsible enough and have the make the decision of whether you actually are going to have a kid or not, based on these types of circumstances. I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to say.
Because I think that you can still have and love a child in those situations. And I don't think that having children is something that we should reserve for the wealthy, for the people who don't have mental health issues. I don't think it's selfish for people who are not in those positions of privilege to have children.
For the rich, for the white, for those who...
There's also a difference between having a mental health issue and then having a mental health issue you're not trying to take care of, right? Like, there's a difference between that. You know, a lot of people have mental health issues, but there's a difference between that and like actually taking care of that issue and being introspective and dealing with what you need to deal with. So
are in a position.
Right. So I just want to quickly respond to you. And
what happens if the topic gets so big he needs mods? If I need a mod, if I get so big I need a mod, I'd probably look for somebody that I don't know, maybe I'd pay him or something. I don't know. Like look for somebody that could do like other work for me and mod and pay them like something like that. You know, if I had enough money, I feel like, you know, doing a 3-hour stream, I don't see why I couldn't give somebody like $40 or something, right?
And why I included that in my personal statement is because that's a personal belief that I ascribe to myself. I don't think generally that it is selfish to bring children into your circumstances. I retract myself from in putting my personal beliefs onto other people's experiences. I only speak from how I feel because I'm the king of my own fate. And in the same way that your mother chose to have 5 children, I chose not to. But I don't want to ever take that away from anybody. I think if you feel like you have the means and you have the willpower to be a mother, to be a father, you do that. But that doesn't give you the right to determine for other people that they should also do
that's fair. An emphasis on like a heavy emphasis on feeling ready to have kids, or like the preparedness of being like a good parent. You know, if you're not up for the challenge, maybe you shouldn't have kids. Is kind of the implication here, which I think is fair, you know, more than anything else. Because the difference between being a good mom and dad can sometimes be just the devotion to the task. You know, if you're not devoted to the task, you're probably not going to make a very good parent. You might not make a horrible parent, but you probably won't make as good of a parent, even if you're in a rough like situation. If you really want to be a good parent and provide for your kids, that'll provide you the motivation to just be better. I like this. I'm just not able to do anything.
Well, I think that's kind of ironic, personally, because I feel like that's exactly the point of the question. It's whenever a person decides to have an abortion, whenever a doctor decides to perform an abortion, whenever a medical professional prescribes an abortion pill, they are making a choice for that child and pushing that onto the unborn person. Then they are saying that the unborn person, you don't deserve to live.
Right, but that's the thing is like, are unborn fetuses people? Have we assigned personhood? At what point do we assign personhood to that thing? And that's what's really up for debate here is it a person? You know, is there proof that it's going to be a damned soul that'll be going to hell forever if you have an abortion? And you really can't prove that. They're like, what does it mean to be a person? There's a lot of different conversations that we have. So
you don't have the right to live. You are not rich enough to live. You are not privileged enough to live. You are not white enough to live.
What about the woman though? Like that like I've had this conversation with so many pro-life people, and it's always, oh, the fetus, the embryo, this unborn life. And I'm like, what about me? But I was actually going through it. You can have all these hypotheticals about you're pushing this onto the...
Like, unfortunately, the question gets into, like, what's the difference between me taking the Plan B versus me coming into... Like, what's the difference between my wife taking Plan B and me coming onto her butt? Like, not to be crude, but like, what is the difference? Do I ejaculate a soul into a woman when I finish? That's a real question, you know. And then at what point does it become a person? These are like the types of questions, you know. I know it sounds crude, but there are some like rituals that we engage in as people that aren't necessarily super logical. Like, you know, so we just have to kind of come up with what our socially constructed idea is of when somebody becomes a person. So, and again, I doubt the caringness from the general conservative sphere when there's no real actual conversation, or there's no push from conservatives to embolden and empower people to be able to have, you know, to deal with their unwanted pregnancies, or even that, to help them when they're going to have a kid. Again, conservatives are very against welfare programs. They're very against... or at least not conservatives, Republicans, which are conservative representation, are against healthcare, fighting poverty, welfare programs, et cetera, et cetera. And the people that vote aren't active enough in their active enough in saying like, we need policies for these things. So I think it's really just about pro-birth. It's about prioritizing the way you feel about a situation over like what is like realistic. Like, you feel like it's a sad thing to abort a fetus, okay, and so you care about that, but then once it's born, it's like, okay, I don't really care anymore. Like, now it's the mother's fault if she doesn't have the kid or whatever. You gotta stop spamming the chat, or I'm gonna ban you. This is the second time I'm putting in timeout today, so if you keep doing it, I'm gonna ban you. But that's really where that comes from. That's something. I just don't think that it's necessarily a care about life. I think it's more of a care about birth and feeling good about yourself, and prioritizing your feelings on someone else's pregnancy over like the actual what's really going on. So
the unborn life. First of all, they never existed. They are not aware of their existence. It's not a hypothetical about what they could have become, or you know, you're not giving them the right to life. They never existed.
First of all, they existed scientifically. An unborn fetus.
Right, but does the personhood exist? Did it really? Is there like that personhood assigned to it that existed? Did a person exist, or did a thing exist that wasn't a person yet? It's like the philosophical conversation we're really having around this.
Fetus matches all of the qualifications that NASA has for a living individual organism. Secondly, I'd like to say, what right does anybody...
But that doesn't mean that it has personhood attached to it. It will become a person, but does it currently have personhood? Just because NASA says that like it's a living creature or being doesn't mean that it's a human. Right. And so that's the conversation we're having. We're not having a conversation like, because you are terminating a life when you get an abortion, of course. But is it a human life? It will be a human, but is it a human yet? That's kind of the conversation we're really having in this instance. So
have to mitigate the outcomes of their own mistakes by oppressing another human being inside of them, by using unjust violence and excessive force against a peaceful being inside of them.
It's not excessive force. It's pretty proportionate force. It's pretty proportionate force. So,
rape or incest?
I got pregnant from rape. 4 years ago, I got pregnant from rape. I was raped for years of my life. I have physical symptoms of that. I have reproductive issues as a result of that. But I think it's important to say that babies like my daughter Rachel, as I talked about before, and babies like my daughter Mira, who I got pregnant with consensually, are the same. They're
for sure, I agree with that. They are definitely the same. But I also don't think it's fair to subject a person to have to carry their rapist's baby. That is cruel and unusual punishment to me. That is horrific. If you want to keep that baby, God bless you. Like, you do your thing. And I can appreciate that strength. But for somebody that wouldn't, I 100% agree with you, and I wouldn't want to either if I could get pregnant. That is a personal choice, and that is not easy. That is mentally destructive to force somebody to keep their rapist's child. That's a lot. So
DNA-wise, there's nothing different in the DNA, the human DNA, between a baby who's conceived in rape and a baby who's conceived consensually.
So you're telling rape women that they should be having their children? Are you going to make that decision for women that are raped just because your experience, you think that?
Hey, thanks, brother. I appreciate that, my man. I really do. Thank you so much.
It ended up being a good idea for you to have these children? Are you then going to stand here and say that all raped women should have their children?
Became a member.
I'm gonna skip through the specific announcements of the memberships. Did you gift media memberships? Wow. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's crazy, brother. Thank you.
Are you going to stand here and say that children who are conceived in rape are somehow different than children who are conceived consensually?
No, but there is a different mental health struggle applied onto the woman who was forced, in this case, to conceive. So, like, I do value that pretty consistently.
Because I don't see a difference.
Then why are you bringing it up?
I would also say that abortion is not evidence-based care for rape victims. There's no research that shows that the outcomes of rape victims getting an abortion is better than those who do not. So
if there's no study on that, then like the only reason that would be like that is because there's no study. There's absolutely no way that a woman being forced to carry her rapist baby wouldn't have significant mental health problems. There's just no way. The mental health implications of forced pregnancy. There's just no way. You can't be that unintelligent to say something like that. So you have to, at the very least, there's no way from a commonsensical perspective not to concede to the understanding that if you force a woman to carry their rapist baby, that it's not going to hurt them mentally. It absolutely would. And if there's no study on that, that's just because there's no study, not because it's false. That's ridiculous. There's just no fucking way. That's insane.
So if we want to go purely based off of medical science and evidence-based care,
no.
Yeah.
So I want to add, this is what I would ask. I'd say, so do you think that it would have a negative impact on a woman to be forced to carry the baby? Do you think it would be a mental health struggle? If she said, no, I don't think so, I'd say, okay, I just don't. At that point, genuinely speaking, I don't think that you're honest or mature enough to have a conversation then. Because if you don't understand that it would be significantly mentally destructive to a woman to be forced to carry the rapist baby, if you can't even understand that idea, if you say, yeah, I think it would be struggle, if your perspective is, yes, I acknowledge that it will be really tough for them, but I think that they should still do it and see a mental health counselor, okay, at least you're acknowledging a reality. But if you're just going to put it aside and say, like, this isn't a real thing, you're not mature enough for a conversation. That's really all it comes down to. You're just not mature enough for a conversation. You're not honest enough for a conversation is really what it is. Because that's insane. So
the fact that we do have statistical evidence that shows that women who have access to abortion and in societies where abortion is accessible, there is an overwhelming decrease in the amount of abortions obtained. And there's also an increase in the economic, emotional, and physical advancements of the people who have access to that care. And I will acknowledge, because I do think that what was inside of me, what was inside of you, what was inside of you, I personally believe it is a life.
Of course
it is. I mean, I held mine in my hands, but to equate that to me, an already birthed human being, this thing, I have a photo of it in my phone. I was going to bring my ultrasound over, but I thought that would be triggering for some people. But what I possessed in my hands when I took it out of my pants, when I expelled it from my body, I think it is ludicrous to equate that to me. There was no head, there was no arms, there was no legs, there was nothing there.
How far along were you?
I was 5 weeks and 7 days.
You were 5 weeks and 7 days?
Yes. And I had the privilege.
Do you know that at 5 weeks a baby has a heartbeat?
It does not.
First of all,
it does not.
It has a two-chambered heart.
No, heart cells can beat in a
It doesn't matter. The heartbeat doesn't assign personhood. Dogs have heartbeats. Dolphins have heartbeats. A heartbeat, again, is not a conversation about personhood. It's not it doesn't matter if it has a heartbeat. If I had a fake heart, I wouldn't really have a heartbeat, but you'd still consider me a person, right? So that's really the conversation there.
Petri dish if you remove it. Heart cells, it's electrical impulses, but I mean, when we talk about life, and this is my personal opinion, I don't think when you draw the conclusion of what is life, I don't think that is a legal question. I think that is a moral and philosophical argument. And
Absolutely.
when you try
1000%.
and establish what is life, I mean, there are plenty of instances where we acknowledge that there is life, and yet we make decisions for them. When people are brain dead, we acknowledge that there is life there, and yet they are dead. I feel like when you try and say, well, this is life, so therefore it is deserving of rights, we extend more rights to someone who is hooked up to a machine, keeping them breathing without any conscious experience, and we extend to them more humanity than a woman and her body. And my argument is simply bodily autonomy. I think in no circumstance shall we force somebody, should the state, I should say, should the government compel somebody to use their body against their will, even if they are personally responsible for the individual. It's the reason why, even if you have a child and that child needs you for bone marrow or blood transfusions, the state cannot compel you and hook you up to a machine against your will to force you to keep that individual alive. And I think and when we live in a democracy and we prioritize human rights, you have to put bodily autonomy above and preserve it regardless, even if you were a drunk driver and your irresponsible, illegal actions led to the harm of another person. The state cannot put you in a position where your body must be used as a resource against your will. I think it is a violation.
Okay,
and
firstly,
what you would like to do,
I asked you about evidence-based care involving rape victims.
Okay.
Not economic outcomes after.
I don't like this woman at this point. She's not a human being. Like she is a human, but she's not acting like a human being in this point. Like you have to be so dishonest to play this game where you don't understand that there's going to be a mental health struggle. Like I was with her, she was cool until this argument. Like I can't. Like I have she's just trying to dismiss the reality, the truth that like people forced to carry their rapist babies, it's going to have a negative impact on them. And she's debating. I don't respect people who debate. I appreciate conversations. Most Jubilee things are conversations. This is a debate tactic. This is like a shameless, like very humanless debate tactic to assert something that you know is wrong. Like she's an intelligent person. She knows that she's incorrect on this topic. She knows she's incorrect by constantly asserting this. And I find it to be it's just a destructive thing.
I wasn't arguing off the rape.
Well, yeah, well, as I said, you said, yes, we do have statistics. And then you brought statistics that had nothing to do with what I said. I would also like to say that the whole bodily autonomy argument, it doesn't hold up. Pregnancy is ordinary and healthy care 99% of the time. Pregnancy is not comparable to hooking you up to a random person. Your offspring is your child. They are genetically and emotionally related to you from the moment they are inside of you. My baby is literally grimacing right now inside of me. They can make squint faces. So it's not even comparable, the relationship between a child and the relationship between a rando. But you do not get to mitigate the outcomes of your choices by violently ending the life of another human being that you are responsible for bringing into dependency on.
Even if I invited someone into my own home, a friend, a family member, I have the means, if I choose, if I tell them I do not want you there, by my own choices, I allow that person into my home, into my space, into my domain, and then I change my mind and I rescind my consent. We have the ability, it's called self-defense. And I'm nowhere near arguing that pregnancy, let me clarify now before you jump to conclusions about what I'm saying. We have I
don't think you have to go to this point in this. I guess I understand what they're saying. They're talking about like rescinding the invitation once they're let into the house. Like, oh, I allow you into my home, but then I ask you to leave. I'm allowed to do that, and that's the similar, I guess, in this instance to doing the same with like a baby. Like, oh, I allowed them into my home, and now I'm letting them leave. I don't know how I feel about our argument, but it's interesting.
Whole issue with, and again, I'm not saying that pregnancy is the same as self-defense, but in those arguments, even when you put yourself and you put another person to a state of dependency, when you invite them into your home, you have the means to remove them. And I think when it comes to your body, and I'm just arguing in terms of the state, there's a lot of things that I disagree with in terms of like people smoking cigarettes, because we have evidence that shows secondhand smoke kills. You can kill somebody from the means of you having an addiction to cigarettes, but should we punish that person for the choice that they made simply because they?
Can I ask something? What about the child inside of you?
There was, what I passed in my hands was not a child, and I think it is very disingenuous to say what I held in my hand is any of you. It just wasn't.
What was it then?
An embryo. It's like a clump of
cells. What is an embryo?
It's a clump of cells.
Well, an embryo is just a term
it's an
for
organized
the stage of
it's not so when we talk about
in the process
it's a fetus,
of entire
right?
human life.
Right, I agree.
So it is.
So it's a human life. So
but no, it's not. It's not a human being yet. That's the thing. Again, we're having a philosophical conversation about it. They would become a human being, but they are not currently a human being, right? That's the conversation that we're having. They will become one if left to their own devices, but they're not at the point where they get humanity.
Emma Lauren just gifted one
membership. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You guys don't have to donate so much today. I appreciate it. But we're not at that point, right? That's really the discussion that we're having about that. So let's keep that in mind.
The egg unfertilized, is that a human being?
No, because fertilization.
Hold on.
Thank you so. Oh, that was the gift to sub, but thank you so much. It really gets into. I think a really good question is this. This is like a really good question on there. If you had to choose between saving just like a zygote or an embryo versus saving a born baby, which one would you prioritize? And you would say, oh, the baby, right? Like if there was, so we know that there is more human value, an actual human value on a born baby than there is on some kind of an embryo inside of like a womb. We know that it's a very different thing. You know, you could even ask yourself, would you rather save a pregnant woman or a born baby? And that's something that you might debate inside of yourself. Personally, that's a hard choice. I'd probably go with the born baby over the pregnant woman. But it's up to you. You know, you personally might have a different opinion. The point is that we understand that there is a difference between some kind of a fetus or a zygote versus a baby, a born baby. We understand that as human beings, and there is a different value, and there is a human value because that baby is born. So
one at a time. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
So an egg is distinct from an embryo because an embryo is a genetically distinct whole organism. It's not merely just a part like skin cells, egg, sperm. Because we can tell that because if you were to apply the net test, so like any amount of nutrition, any environment, or any amount of time, like an embryo will develop into a mature member of its species, but sperm, eggs, skin cells, tumors, they're not going to develop into a whole organism. So it's not the same thing.
Oh, yeah, of course. I do. I absolutely agree. I think an embryo is a stage of development, but I don't think you afford...
I also think it's a good question to ask, like, at what point do you think I'm assuming a lot of the individuals that are pro-life or pro-birth, really, I'm assuming a lot of them also believe that there is a soul in those the fetuses and whatnot. So I'd ask them, like, at what point is there a soul inside there? When does the old soul get in there? The old Kia soul. Don't buy Kia, guys. The dealership I went to was terrible. Okay, buy something else. Only buy Dodge Challengers. I'm just kidding. I've never had one of those, but it sounds pretty cool.
That stage of development, the same human rights that you would a full-grown human being. It's the reason why we make a distinction between children and adults. A child can develop into an adult. Do we automatically ascribe them? You can drink, you can vote. Well, they are not that yet. And why make that distinction? But then say,
how does that give us the authority to kill the child?
I'm not saying give you the authority to kill a child, but I think if the argument that I'm making is I feel like there's a fundamental difference between something being attached to you, reliant on your resources, and something being dependent on you for other types of resources beyond your physical body. It's the reason why I'm making a reference to blood transfusions and organ donations, because that is directly attributing what your body needs to survive to give to somebody else to help them live, as opposed to a child that is already born that simply needs your labor and financial resources to keep them alive and support their already existence and living on their own.
But when we're talking about the value of human life, I don't think it's at all fair to say that an unborn child is worth more than their mother or who would be their mother. I don't think it's fair to say that the mother's needs and her state of life or their state of life don't matter in that situation, because they do. And it's not this like killing a fetus for fun. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be in that situation or to have an abortion. True. But like, you can't just act like we always should be prioritizing this, what isn't even a child yet.
But none of us are saying we're prioritizing the child over the mother. We're saying,
yes, you are. Yes, you are.
What happens during pregnancy?
What happens during
you are. You're making the argument that you're prioritizing the life of this potential child over some kind of comfortability of the mother. And if that's like your argument, that's fine to have that argument. I'm not saying that you can't have that argument, but that is the argument that you're making. It's obviously more nuanced than that, but like that's what you're saying, and I think that's fine. I think it's okay. I get why you have that perspective. So
pregnancy, the mother is trying to think of the word.
Gestating.
The mother is giving life to the fetus. The mother is supporting the fetus's life as it grows. And so what we're saying is that the child and the mother should be equally supported through the pregnancy.
Are they? We're not saying that they are. We're saying they are.
So supporting the financial needs of a mother is a need that can be handled through nonviolent means, whereas you guys are advocating for violent.
So then advocate for that. Focus your advocation on that. The problem is that's never a focus of advocation for conservatives. They'll say like, "Oh, I have a church group that does this." There's no robust system that satisfies this enough. You would need to be in support of like much more robust welfare, and simply put, people aren't. So like that's where it comes from. What the fuck is this like so difficult to kill for? It's not even losing health.
Means to end the life
of
a person.
No, it's not violent.
It is violent to rip, suction, starve. It is violent to take limbs off of people. It is violent to induce a heart attack. Yeah, and you starve. You starved your embryo. That's what happened. That's how the pill works.
You probably do that in labs somewhere.
This woman's like very emotional. That's a conservative one. I really tuned out once they started screaming. Yeah, like I really, it's hard to be too tuned into this. It's just yelling. That's pretty much what the argument's going to be now. So
that's how you do it.
But it's a human being. I feel like we keep getting away from the fact.
It's not though.
But
there's nothing to get away from.
That life begins at conception. It's a human embryo.
Science does not say that. The Bible says that.
Science doesn't. Well, science might say there is a life that starts at conception, but it doesn't say that there is human or person. That when people say there isn't life at conception, what they're indirectly saying is that there is like personhood isn't assigned yet, right? Like that's the distinction. That's the argument that they're making. They're not assigning personhood yet. That's when we talk about like where life begins. We're not actually talking about where life begins. We're talking about where personhood begins. That's the actual spot that we're talking about. Just to be very clear about that.
Question for you really quick.
Let's move on to the next prompt because it feels like the conversation is not going anywhere.
Fair enough.
Well, I didn't get a pro-choicers and pro-lifers together.
I'd rather abort a child than put them through the foster care system.
That's a rough question, man. Damn. Jubilee hits with these goddamn questions. That's a rough question, man. Wow. I don't know. That's a pretty intense question to ask. I'd rather abort a child than put them through the foster care system. I think that, first of all, the foster care system is full of abuse, and nobody seems to be particularly interested in actually changing that. It's also incredibly expensive to be able to adopt, which contributes to the difficulty in the system. And so I think that that's something to acknowledge. Second of all, birthing a baby and then putting it through the foster care system requires a significant amount of work to do, because you have to carry the baby and then you have to birth the baby, and it's a very stressful, I would say, as far as a bodily traumatic experience to go through. It's a lot. It's harsh. And so given those factors, I mean, that's somebody's personal choice. I could understand. But I don't think it usually goes, it's not as simple as like, oh, will you put it up for adoption or not? There's, like I said, it's very body stressful. And it's just like, it's rough. It's more than just that question. It's often like, do you prefer the foster care system, or do you prefer an abortion, or like going through like this intense, the 9 months of like intense, just like fucking your body up to have this baby. So. The fucking birds. I hear birds in their video. Oh no, I don't. These birds are outside my house. Sorry, but it was the video. My bad.
And this is
when I paused it, they stopped chirping.
Didn't consider this until I myself was put into that situation where it's not just get pregnant, put the kid in the foster system. It's that, again, like I said, 9 months of pregnancy, and I would not go through those 9 months of pregnancy, even though if I had the option of giving my kid up to the foster care system, like you have to still go through those 9 months of pregnancy. It's not just, you can just drop it off.
True.
So I feel like first, before we get into the conversation, we need to establish how foster care works. As someone who is in the system, I understand how the system works. As someone whose parents were foster parents, I understand the system is not something you can willingly just register your child for, not like the adoption system. Foster care is a system of the government to protect children who are in unsafe environments, that they see the child as being in an unsafe environment. My mother was a drug addict. We were living in government housing. We were homeless multiple times. My mother was severely addicted to alcohol, just not at a time in her place where she could really have a family, but she did have a family. And so my grandmother came and watched us. And my grandmother, over time, just really was convicted, because she was a devout Christian woman, of the reality that this is no environment for a child to grow up in. And she wanted to do something, if anything, to help us have a better life. And she knew financially she could not take us in, but she wanted to do something. So she called CPS, and CPS came and took me and my siblings away. Now, did I have the best experience of foster care? Absolutely not. I still live today with bruises and sores on my body from foster care. And I was in there up until I was 19 months old. I was a baby, but it still affects me to this day. And I really struggle when I hear people say that, like, a child in foster care is somehow less valuable because of the way the government treats children in foster care.
I don't think that people are trying to say that. If that's what's communicated, then like that's obviously wrong. But I can understand that. People aren't saying that they're less than. People are saying that it's not an ideal scenario, and if you don't have to subject somebody to that, it would be better if you didn't. That's what people are trying to say.
Because I just don't think that's a correct opinion to have. To treat a child as less valuable is dehumanizing, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm 1,000% against dehumanization of any human being whatsoever.
I don't think anyone is saying that foster care kids are less valuable, though. Like, you didn't mean that, did you? No, nobody's saying that. I just wanted to make that clear. Do you have a uterus?
I do not have a uterus.
You do not have a uterus.
But I can see why, based on the well, this I think it's important to be understanding of this person, because that's how it feels to them. It's like, well, no, maybe they may not be explicitly saying that, but I can see why people would he would think that, based, especially since this is something that resonates with him a lot. So I understand that. I mean, I think it's fair enough to say that. So
I'm not saying that
I think it's fair to say that he gets that impression. I think that's perfectly. I think it's reasonable. He gets that impression.
That you should not be included in this discussion, but I'm saying that that's important to keep in mind, is that you could never be in this position of having to decide whether you in your body want to keep and raise a child from your body.
You are arguing for the slaughter of human beings because you're pro-choice.
I mean, not for nothing, but like in the way that she's trying to suggest that he can't really talk about this conversation. She's not being explicit about it, but like she is suggesting it. She's trying to put that thought in our mind. It's really the same thing when a jury or a lawyer will bring up a point he knows is going to be a bad point that will be like emotionally provocative, and then he gets it like shot down by the jury, and they say, strike that from your minds, jury. The judge will say that, but like they never do. The goal is to do some kind of emotional provocation. But I think that he has a different experience considering he was in the foster care system. I think it's fair to say like this, hey, this is what he's saying there is, this is how it makes me feel when we have this discourse around abortion. And there's nothing wrong with being like, oh yeah, fair enough. Like, let me think about that. So.
And I'm standing here in where a fetus could not.
Fetus, so it's not a strong word.
It's really not. But could I just finish my statement? We're standing here in defense of the children because they do not get that voice, because they do not have that voice because they are in the womb.
So then, are you going to adopt it? I'm assuming you will, right?
That's not an argument you can make because I am currently not in the financial place to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they shitting on this guy so hard? He's just trying to have a conversation about how he was in an abusive scenario. They're like, it's fine that I disagree with him as well, but they're like shitting on this guy. Let him. What the fuck? Jesus. Okay. Yeah, Diablo 4 is fun so far. I'm enjoying it. It's cool. It's cool. Level
but it
40.
is a choice that I could make to become a foster parent. The issue is that becoming a foster parent is something that you register with the state. It's not as easy as just saying like, well, you can just one day become a foster parent. It is a long, tedious process. It's expensive. There's tons of things that go into it.
Yeah. I would also say,
you guys had something to say as well.
Talking about who should have a voice in this discussion, but it's like the unborn don't have a voice. They're not yet able to like have a voice, but they are still human beings with dignity, and we ought to respect that. So I think it's. I think we really need to sort of figure out like what are we talking about here? Because if abortion doesn't kill human beings, then no justification is necessary. However, if it does kill human beings, no justification is adequate.
I always say that if murder was happening at the rate that abortions happen at, it would be Armageddon. Like, it is just absolute. Women, I think it's like a quarter of women will have an abortion in their lifetime.
Murder, so.
If that was happening, if an eighth of the population was being murdered, then it would be the purge.
Why do you think we're so distraught, though?
It doesn't affect you, though. But
it doesn't affect us.
If I hadn't told you, you wouldn't know.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
But why is
every single person, even if they are not under my jurisdiction, the oppression of that person is my business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is.
I respect that approach.
This is to us. It sort of sounds.
I think that a fair question to ask here, and these young people might not feel this way, but I'd say like, well, what is your opinion on the oppression of LGBTQ people? Because fundamentally, they're saying, hey, oppression exists and I fight against it. Okay, fair enough. What do you think about like gay people? What do you think about trans people? It's a good question to ask to test like their moral like, do you actually care about oppression, or are you like, is this one instance where you're weaponizing it in some capacity? I'm not saying that they are, and they might be gay and trans affirming, and that's nice. But I would imagine they probably wouldn't be because they're religious. And I just want to see, like, do you really care about advocation in some capacity? Or is this more about just a constant promotion of, like, religious, like, regressive religious ideology, specifically for that woman?
if we're saying it's like if you don't want an abortion, sort of just don't have one. Yeah. But we hear it sort of in the same ways, like if you like don't like slavery, don't have a slave. We sort of hear it sort of in the same ways because it's involving like it's sort of the destruction of the dignity of a human person. Like abortion and slavery violate the dignity of a human person.
So you're comparing abortion?
I actually agree with that.
Right, but again, the problem is like what needs to be talked about here is what needs to be addressed here first is like what is it a person? That's what we're kind of missing here. I think that's where we have to start.
I actually agree with that. And I think that ties in nicely to this whole systems and foster care argument, because people argued vehemently at the time in which we were about to end slavery that we should not end slavery because we don't have the systems. We don't have the systems ready for all of the slaves that will now be free. There's no jobs out there for them. They don't
I don't think that was ever a concern.
have any land. Oh, we need to keep them as slaves until
I don't think that
we have the right system.
No, you're making arguments. What? Wait, what? Nobody was arguing that. She's lying. What do you mean?
Not end slavery because we don't have the systems. We don't have the systems ready for all of the slaves that will now be free. There's no jobs out there for them. They don't have any land. Oh, we need to keep them as slaves until we have the right system.
Nobody was saying we want to get rid of slavery, but we got to have the right system for it. Nobody ever said that. What the fuck is she talking about? Wait, what a weird lie. Oh, back in the day, they were like so desperate to end slavery, but like they were like, oh, we don't have the systems in place. What are you talking about? That's not a real thing. That was never a discussion. The discussion was always, I don't want to lose money. I want to own people because I want to own them for financial gain. Where the fuck is this argument coming from? You just made... you fucking made that up. You're a liar. What the fuck was that? That's a debate tactic. That's a debate tactic. No. People might have argued that it would hurt the economy. That's not what she's saying. She's saying that we don't have the right systems in place. We need to do jobs, this, that, the other thing. She's not arguing what actually happened. She's talking about it in the way that like a progressive would talk about changing systemic racism or something. Like that's not a conversation that happened. It was just, I want to maintain slaves. That's it. And again, conservatives, you can provide these like more robust supports. And focus on, reducing people having the need for pregnancy or for support foster care systems, because conservatives don't seem to be in support of like empowering those systems.
No, you don't get to degrade the dignity of another human being until you're ready for them to be here.
And black people are still suffering today.
Until you're ready.
I got to hear what she said again one more time. It was just preposterous.
I actually argued vehemently at the time in which we were about to end slavery that we should not end slavery because we don't have the systems.
Nobody said we don't have the systems.
We don't have the systems ready for all of the slaves that will now be free. There's no jobs out there for them.
Nobody was saying there's no jobs for the slaves. We can't do it. There's no jobs for them. Like, she's playing a very dishonest game here.
They don't have any land. Oh, we need to keep them as slaves until we have the right system. No, you don't get
Nobody ever said that.
to degrade until you are ready for them to live dignified lives. That's unjust.
I want to touch on the prompt about the foster care system, and I just wanted to emphasize that for me, I didn't take into consideration the foster care. I don't feel like anybody is less than. I don't think that you're less than. I think me and you are entitled to the same rights. Of course, just personally, when I made my decision, it wasn't a matter of I don't want my child to go to the foster care or be adopted out. That wasn't the question. What I took into consideration, what my boyfriend and I decided together was we did not want to put me through the physical constraints of pregnancy without him, because my boyfriend, he's a very traditional Christian, and I'm no longer religious. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I'm not religious anymore, but I respect his views, and he carries a lot of views that you have, but because of his consideration to me and his approach to the family structure, he knew that he was not in a position to take care of me in that vulnerable time. In the weeks that I was pregnant, it was extremely hard for me. It was mentally and physically draining. The changes that were going on, it was to the point where I could not participate in the daily activities that one does, go to work, feed themselves, get out of bed. It was very psychologically difficult in that short period of time. And we knew at that point that it was going to be a very demanding and laborious pregnancy had I gone through with it. But because of how he feels and his responsibility and his duties that he places on himself as a man, he wanted to make sure that experience of pregnancy, and when we do decide to have a child, I'm in a point where I can be cared for appropriately. Just the way I waited out, and again, it wasn't because this aversion to the foster care. In fact, I feel like we should better resources for those children because they have every right to be here. I'm more so focused on whether or not, again, should the government enforce and place themselves in such a personal matter when it's a matter of people using their bodies.
I would think most of us in some regard agree with you. I can't speak for everyone here. I don't know everyone's various political beliefs. But I think most of us would agree with you. And that's why we're pro-life, is because we see it as that's what the government is doing to children in the womb. The reality that the government could have just, because of the way that the government works and because of the way that the abortion system works, the reality that I just could be non-existent and not exist at all is horrifying. And the reality that my memory, my life, my genetic makeup, the people that fought for years to give me rights, that can all just be erased. It's horrifying.
But it would have never happened. It's not like it happened and then like it was erased. Like
I was conceived. My mother had the option to abort.
Yeah.
Therefore, it could have happened.
I mean, again, I can understand where he's coming from. You know, it's one of those things where like I could have just not been, and that's a very scary thought. I get that. Wait, I could have swore I just had like almost a Kratos-esque type fucking markings, and now I can't find them. What happened? This is ridiculous.
Should be informed if their teen is seeking an abortion.
Oh, that's a question. Parents should be informed if their teens are seeking an abortion. I don't think so. I think that the kid deserves enough privacy in that instance to make their own decision there. I don't think that the parents should have access to that. No, I don't agree with that. You know, it's a very interesting conversation to have too, because I think that you know, in a lot of these areas, it's so interesting. I was talking to my wife yesterday about the reason why she doesn't really want to be like a child, like a child, no, why she doesn't really want to work with. She doesn't want to be like a school counselor, like a guidance counselor, like, because the issues that the children are exhibiting, the behavioral problems that they're having, are usually due to the parents, like, not engaging in a correct way. That's usually what it boils down to. A lot of the behavioral problems that a kid will have are because they come from like home. They come from like them from their home, and that. I feel like that's somewhat comparable here, is that like you're not allowed to really engage with the parents. You're engaging with the kid on something they shouldn't be engaging with. You don't really, and you don't get to give them that privacy. If their kid is cutting, you tell the parents, and the parents generally will chastise them. Whereas like you need to interact with the parents and the kids when it comes to a behavior. You know, because if the kid's cutting because they're frustrated or expressing themselves in some way, that needs to be dealt with properly. It needs to be dealt with like what's going on at home. But if you tell the parents, a lot of times they'll get punished and they'll get restricted. Things will be taken away from them. Obviously, it's not good to cut yourself, but the point that I'm making here is that oftentimes it's not the correct way to go. And I say that because this is kind of one of those things where like the parents shouldn't really get the decision on whether or not they have the abortion for the kid. And, you know, a very religious parent would just maybe restrict them from being able to do it. I think a kid should be able to get an abortion without their parents knowing. So let's see. Should I just name a pop again? Can I do that?
So when I was being sexually abused, my parents didn't know. When my rapist found out that I had a pregnancy scare, he was like, I will f***ing kill you. If this is the situation, I'll kill you. And I think that if I had gone into an abortion facility, as many girls and women have, and been forced by my rapist to have an abortion, I think that this is another I guess, part of a system where mandatory reporting fails, as it has many times in abortion facilities, particularly in Planned Parenthood. Parents need to be informed if their child's being sexually abused, and because mandatory reporting often fails in this way, because Planned Parenthood is a business and they make money off of what they do, I think that it's really important for the parents at least to have this knowledge and to have this understanding.
Yeah, I think it's a really kind of tricky situation and topic to discuss, just because.
What is the implication when you say that Planned Parenthood is a business? Are you trying to say that they're like, because they profit off this thing, they want to provide more abortions or something? Because then that means that everything that makes money is bad, fundamentally speaking, and you'd have to operate with that feeling and that thought and that expression. So
there are so many, like, there's such a breadth of situations that can occur and have occurred, and I'm so sorry for what you went through, by the way, but like that situation is really awful, and it definitely highlights how having parental oversight is good and important in certain situations, but also like there are situations where young people are in situations with abusive households, abusive parents, who, if they found out that that teenager, that child, was attempting to do something to care for themselves and to help themselves live the life that they need to, or for their health, or whatever reason they might have for doing it, they'll be prevented from seeking care of any kind. Not even just like an abortion. They'll be prevented from seeking any kind of sexual wellness care, health care of any sort, because their parent is aware that they were looking for that kind of support.
And I'd like to go off of what you're saying. I agree full-heartedly that there are different situations where it could be dangerous for the individual to tell their parents, and that's why I think pregnancy resource centers, which is what we support, are such a valuable tool, because they have the right to put protections over this young individual or older individual. And if they are in an unsafe situation, they house them, they feed them, they get them a job away from the area where they are. You know, they do stuff to help. But also those situations.
I don't think it's going to be a perfect process, because then they have to, like, a lot of people are afraid of their parents, and if their parents find out, they'll just submit to whatever their parents say, especially as a kid. So I don't know that that's enough, but okay.
Situations and the situation where the child was conceived, that child still has value. So that's why I'm a firm believer in protecting both the mother and the child.
I mean, I would also like to say that, like, as much as young people don't like to hear it, and as much as I didn't like to hear it myself, because I had, you know, a messed up household, because I had a parent who was not a safe parent. I think that parents have rights. Uniquely, like the Ohio Initiative for Choice right now is trying to attack parents' rights, trying to make it so that people can get medical procedures or supposed medical procedures in abortions and not have to notify their parents. There have been teenagers and young women who have died from abortion procedures.
We have people that.
Okay, maybe. I doubt that that's a very robust. Hold on, let me.
Procedures or supposed medical procedures in abortions and not have to notify their parents. There have been teenagers and young women who have died from abortion procedures.
I imagine that's a pretty significant outlier. What's the number? What's the lethality of abortions? That's like I don't think that this is robust in any capacity.
People that go and counsel outside of Planned Parenthoods and abortion facilities, and we've documented, reported to the state suspicious behavior of people bringing busloads of minors in to have abortions, and
that's not happening. But okay,
one of those things that we just have to look at the reality and we have to address it.
There's actually statistics that say that the majority of women who have undergone sex trafficking report having more than one forced abortion, specifically saying forced abortion.
And we are against that too.
Okay, well, I'm a hot take. I'm against sex trafficking, so it's kind of irrelevant.
Right? We are against people being forced into abortions as much as anything else.
I think parents have an obligation to care for the child that they have in their care, and I think it is a parent's responsibility to support that child, of course. But then again, I feel like I'm speaking from a privilege of where I obtained mine when I was already a legal adult, so I didn't have to tell my parents. I just know for me personally, because I went to Planned Parenthood to obtain my abortion, and even when I obtained my birth control and my routine screenings from them, some of the questions that they always asked me was, are you safe? Are you in a safe situation? Are you doing this because you consented to it? When I obtained my abortion, they asked me, is someone forcing you? And they have signs all over in the clinic telling them, or telling patients that.
I'm trying to figure out if it's a difference between a safe versus an unsafe abortion, because like if it's an abortion that was done with a robust like care associated with it, it's going to be safer. Whereas like I guess you say illegal abortions, especially in states now in the United States that you're not allowed to get abortions, I imagine could be more dangerous. Since it's illegal, there's not going to be as many medical restraints on it. Okay.
They are obligated to report if you are being
It's like, okay, each year 4.7 to 13.2% of maternal deaths can be attributed to unsafe abortions, but that is specifically differentiated between a safe abortion, one that is done in a way that has more obviously restrictions placed on it. So I don't know what the percentage of safe ones are. I can't find that. But interesting.
Trafficked or abused in some way.
The reason I disagreed was because I believe the prompt said teens should have to come to their parents. I am acquainted with someone who just had an abortion who is the same age as us, and she did not tell her parents. She has yet to tell her parents.
Well, I think we're talking about telling parents before the procedure, particularly, because that has ramifications. I mean, I'm sure afterwards there's some ramifications, but I think parents, like I said, would have the right to know before you get the procedure.
I have a question. Because I think a lot of us are coming from the approach of like minors, but I'm saying it specifically with my case because I was already legally an adult when I had mine. Do you feel like even in cases, although we are teens here, I'm still legally an adult, should my medical information, now that I am legally able to obtain care on my own, because that's where I'm going to operate from, should even against my wishes, should they be informed? Because I think for me, with such a sensitive topic, I want to go to them when I'm ready. because I'm coming here now sharing my story, but I was not prepared to come out with mine because it's still something that I grieve with to this day. It's still something that my boyfriend and I, we still tackle with every day. But I just don't agree with the idea that even though I'm a teenager, I'm still an adult and I should still have my choice to not expose my private medical information to my parent. Now that I'm willing and able to make that choice, that should be violated.
I think that we would all agree that, like, for an adult, no, if you're a legal adult, you shouldn't have to tell your parents. However, I think we're specifically talking about minors.
Okay.
Do you think it's possible to find a middle ground on the issue of abortion?
Not possible.
I think it's possible.
I think there's some ways to find some middle grounds.
Yeah, I think we already have here today.
Yeah, we already found a middle ground. It's called to provide safe abortions within the second trimester. There you go. That's your compromise. So,
like certain parts of it.
But that's on parts of it, not on the abortion issue itself.
Thank you guys for your time and your vulnerability. I appreciate hearing new experiences.
Thanks for sharing your stories, no matter what.
She's like, I'm ready to go.
Okay.
I'm trying to look for healing things. Okay, well, that was an interesting conversation for sure.